Hey friends, I've gone back and forth about whether or not to share this. It's not a review. It's not an update on a reading challenge. It's just, it's something that has bothered me enough that I feel like I'm supposed to say something. But if I'm overstepping my bounds, those of you, you know who you are free to say too far. But I want to talk to you a little bit about a book that really impacted me last year. There's a purpose, I promise. Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Rebay. Randy himself is a Filipino American, grew up in the Midwest. Um, Teaches English in California now, I believe. Um, his main character is a young man who's a senior in high school. His name is Jay. He's going to graduate and go on to the University of Michigan, which I'm a Michigan girl born and raised and a fan of the University of Michigan. So right away, I loved Jay, right? Jay was born in the Philippines. His parents came to the States when he was 2. His dad is Filipino, his mom is American. So he's a Filipino American. His cousin ends up dead. Spoiler alert. That's not the spoiler alert, but there's one coming, couple coming. Um, he doesn't believe the story that his cousin was killed as a result of his involvement with drugs. He knows that the Filipino government is not the most honest when it comes to how they deal with people, and their president's making a big push to get rid of drug users and drug dealers, and sometimes people that he wants to get rid of are painted in that light so he can justify getting rid of them. So he convinces his parents that he wants to go say his goodbyes and pay his respects. So he goes to the Philippines for his senior year spring break. But he also starts digging into the death of his cousin June. The uncle he's staying with, June's father, is not the nicest guy, and you start out really not liking him at all until you realize that part of the reason he and Jay clash so badly is he feels that Jay has completely turned his back on the Filipino part of his heritage. Can't speak the language much, doesn't really know much about the culture. Used to come to visit a lot, and those visits have kind of stopped as he's gotten to be a busy high schooler. Um, but it's this uncle whose son was killed. And so Jay's a little frustrated that he doesn't seem any more grief stricken. They just don't talk about June anymore. Um, he finds out secrets about his cousins. It's a culture that does not embrace same sex relationships. And he's got an aunt who lives with another woman, and they sort of have to keep everything on the down low. The whole family knows about the relationship, but to the rest of the world, they're just friends. Um, in the end, he finds out that it really is as tragic as he had been told. His cousin really had kind of gone off the rails and kind of gone off the deep end. But more so than that journey, as powerfully written as that part of his journey was, to me, the bigger part of the story is the fact that Jay spends a lot of the book struggling with the fact that he has not been intentional in honoring the Filipino side of his heritage. He's sort of let that slide. Not that he was ever actively, I'm ashamed I'm Filipino, I'm going to pretend like I'm not. He just didn't consciously make the choice to stay connected to that part of his heritage. Um, and so part of a lot of the book is him trying to figure out how to keep one foot in each culture because his mom's American, his dad's Filipino, so both of these cultures made him. So it's Jay trying to figure out how to do this delicate balancing act where he honors both cultures without necessarily elevating or denigrating one or the other. In the end, he decides to ask his parents to let him take some time off of school rather than going on to college right away in the fall. He wants to go back to the Philippines and live there for a time with his family to get a feel for the country, to walk the streets, to breathe the air, to learn the language, to immerse himself in what his father grew up in, to get to know that side of his heritage so he can do a better job of embracing it in his own identity. Now, I read a lot of good stories last year. I read a lot of good books last year. This one pounded me in a way that no other one did because at the end of the book, I sat back and went, I will never have to have this struggle. My dad's family was Mormon for generations, so I have a really detailed genealogy that takes that side of the family back into the 1600s. My aunt did the work. My mom's sister-in-law did the work. My mom's dad's family goes clear back to the Mayflower. I will never have to try to understand, okay, yeah, I'm German, French, English, and Welsh. If you want to go way, way far back into the tribal eras of the Celtics and the Germanic tribes, okay, yeah, things were a little wild, but those cultures have sort of ceased to exist. I will never have to try to find a way to straddle two different cultures in embracing my own identity. I won't. It's not in my blood. Why am I saying this? There's a book that was recently published. Like within the last few days, it's gone public. It's called American Dirt. It's about the experience of Latinx people trying to cross the southern border into this country. It was written by a white woman. She's not in any way, shape, or form connected to the Latinx community. Immigrating to this country over the southern border is not a part of her family experience. She simply wrote a story that she has no personal connection to. Now, you can argue with me about whether or not it's okay to write those kinds of stories. And we could have a good discussion. But if we're going to elevate a story, if we're going to go after a story to make it a movie, if we're going to go after a story to promote it as being an own voices story, we need to go to the Latinx authors that are out there and promote their stories. The book The Help, that became such a popular movie, written by a white woman, supposed to be talking about the experience of Black women who have been hired as domestic help. There are things about being from different parts of the world and different cultures that you can't understand unless you're from there. I love it when people tell me, I've had a couple of moms lately tell me what it's like to parent adults when all of their kids are still home. You don't know. You don't know. You don't know what it's like to parent adults. I didn't know until all my kids moved out. I had no idea what it was like to be an empty nester until I was one. I didn't know what it was like to parent a toddler until I had one. And she could look at me and say, no, and run away when I told her to do something. You don't know what it's like to live in a circumstance until you've lived in it. Book learning means nothing. I'm not saying don't ever write about other groups of people that you're not a part of, but do your research and write it from a place of respect and a place of educating yourself. This book on the cover has a white background with this really pretty blue design and then barbed wire. I have no problem with that. Book covers sometimes have shocking symbols on them, shocking designs on them. They're attention getting. They're meant to catch your eye when it's on the bookshelf with 1,000 other books. But for her book launch party, the containers holding the flowers for the centerpieces were wrapped in barbed wire. The purpose of barbed wire is to inflict harm, not to be used as a decorative item. And when the purpose of the barbed wire in the book is as a part of the border fence, what are you saying to people when that is on your centerpieces? The author went and got her nails done, found an artist that was able to turn her book cover into nail art. So she has this really pretty nail, the white background, the blue design, and barbed wire. Your centerpieces and your fingernails are literally wearing the symbol of trying to harm individuals trying to come to this country. Now, you and I can get into a discussion about immigration law and whether or not it's too harsh. I tend to fall right in the middle of both extreme ends. You break the law, you pay the consequences, but I think immigration laws are too harsh and too difficult to get by, which makes me really unpopular with both sides of the argument. I think some major reworking needs to be done on immigration law, but I also think that just letting anybody come who wants to come without background checks is dangerous. So do with that what you will. The point is, in a book that involves barbed wire as a way of inflicting harm and keeping people out, and we're going to use it as a decorative tool, her fans don't understand why people are upset. This book is now being talked about as a movie with a white producer, a white director. Nobody that has any connection to the experience being talked about in the book. I'm not saying you shouldn't do things that are outside of your people group. I will pick on my daughter again. I mention her all the time. She's a booktuber. She's also an author. She's working on a manuscript right now that has some people in it that she knows she doesn't have the experience. So she's been asking for sensitivity readers, people that are from that particular demographic, to read it and say to her, yeah, this works, or no, you're completely off base. If you're going to write out of your own personal experience, you better have somebody there by your side or somebody to read and help you edit, and be willing to respond if they tell you you're nuts, you're way off base. like I said, I hesitated to put this out there because I am a white woman talking about a white woman writing a book about Latinx with people, individuals. But my intention this year, I've been very, very careful to go after books by Latinx authors, authors of color, people who are not exactly like me. Because I want to be challenged. I want to be made to think. Reading for fun is all well and good, and I have those books on my TBR for the year too. I have cheesy, sappy romances, I have rom-coms, I have murder mysteries, I have all the things I love, but I am also trying to stretch my reading horizons just a bit. There's a reading challenge that's taking place all year. They have one prompt almost every month. They skip September and October because there are Latinx readathons that happen during those 2 months. And so they'd rather have you do those. And then they take December off because it's end of the year and everybody's trying to finish up reading challenges. But they have a book a month for 9 months out of the year. It's called the Con Sabor Reading Challenge. A book a month. But the point is to read Latinx authors. I'm also doing one in February that involves reading books by Black authors. But my goal is to not stop in February. My goal is to make sure that at least a chunk of my reading is by Black authors, Latinx authors, authors who are not stereotypical heterosexual 50-year-old women. Simply because the world is a lot bigger than my experience of it. And for me to understand the experiences others are having, I need to hear their voices, especially in the fiction that I read, in the art that I observe, in the songs I hear, in the musicals I watch, in the shows that I watch, in the plays that I see. I need to hear from other people who are having a far different experience than I am because their place of origin is different than mine. I'm not telling you not to read American Dirt. What I'm saying is if you want to read books by Latinx authors or books about the Latinx experience, go for books by Latinx authors. Go for books by Afro-Latinx authors. I read one not too long ago called With a Fire on High. She has another one out, and I can't think what the name of it is. But just today at the library, it took me 2 seconds to pick up The Last 8 by Laura Pohl, which is an Own Voices. I'm really intrigued. Welcome to Area 51, home to the last teenagers on Earth. There are 8 of them. That's the last 8. Super intrigued. This one I found strictly because I went looking online. Somebody had shared on social media and said, if you really want to support Latinx authors, here's some titles, and they shared some graphics and pictures. So I screenshotted the pictures and I just went looking at my local library. The Affairs of the Falcons by Melissa Rivero. This was in my library under debut authors. So apparently she's completely new. So I'm saying all of this in a very long-winded way. And like I said, I may be overstepping my bounds because I'm a white woman criticizing another white woman's writing. If we want to truly understand the experiences of those living around us, regardless of what that experience is whether it's discrimination based on skin color, sexuality, gender, religion, creed, educational status, socioeconomic status, whatever type of discrimination people have dealt with, if we truly want to understand it in a way that will lend to our empathy and our compassion, we need to hear the stories from the voices of those who have gone through it. If I want to understand the challenge of battling infertility, I've got friends I can go talk to understand that. If I want to understand the challenges of losing a child, I've walked that one. I don't need anybody to tell me. I can talk to you about being married and a wife and a mom and a pastor's wife, which is a really weird experience in and of itself. I can talk to you about being a musician. I can talk to you about all of those things. I can talk to you about dealing with chronic joint injuries. I can talk to you about being a person who's been diagnosed with cyclothymic disorder, high functioning bipolar, essentially. I've got my own experiences that I can give voice to. But if I really want to increase my empathy and my compassion, I need to let those who've had experiences I will never have tell me their stories. Now, maybe with enough time and with the right kind of help, I can adequately tell the stories of others, of those people to others. Maybe not. But I would encourage you, If you're one of those looking at the fuss over American Dirt and saying, but don't we want to understand these people's stories? We absolutely do. But do some digging. It took me a matter of seconds. And my tiny little library in a town of 25,000 people had plenty of titles by Latinx authors that I can read to support them and to sit and to learn their stories from their mouths rather than relying on a white author to come along and explain it to me. So I encourage you to broaden your own reading horizons. If you read a lot of straight white authors, maybe stretch it by finding some authors who are a part of the LGBTQ community. Make it your intention for once every month to read something by an author of color, a Black or Latinx author. Heck, do all three. Every month, read a book by an author who is a member of the LGBTQ community, an author who's Black, and an author who's Latinx. Go from there. Asian American, whatever. Add on as you will. The point is, if we really want to begin to understand those that we live around and those that we interact with on a regular basis, and we really want to increase our ability to be empathetic and compassionate to the struggles that they face, we have to hear their stories out of their own mouths and stop believing that we as white people can tell their stories for them, because we just can't tell them as effectively as they can.